Hello, everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour number 41. This is our weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And I want to go straight to Alex. What's up, Alex?
I need you guys to console me on a small setback I had at work last week, which this is a small piece of advice for anybody who's considering doing this. Never, ever, 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 never, 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 never change your platform in the middle of a project.
Oof.
And you guys are nodding and saying, of course, like, why would you change a platform in the middle of a project? Well, I was having some issues with the Mac that I was using, and just coincidentally, one of the other people that I work with, their Mac hard drive blew up, so they had to get a PC for him. And so I said, well, Alex, you want to switch to a PC? And so I said, well, okay, I'll just go and check all my plugins, and I checked all of my, 60-odd plugins to check all the licenses. I've got AU and VST, so it's all good. And usually on the Mac I use AU because I tend to find that it's slightly more efficient with the CPU. So I said, yeah, I can change to PC. It'll be fine. Renoise works on PC. It's all good, no problem. So got the PC, wrestled with Windows 8 like a sort of a huge grizzly bear because it's like so unwieldy and disgusting and bad and terrible. Sorry, Vince. Like pulling my hair out.
I don't use Windows 8, so that's okay.
Anyway, get Renoise in there, like install all of the 60 plugins, like do all of the licensing, all that kind of, plug in my licenses and key codes and all that, and it's all working. Great. Now, all of the Renoise files that I had saved from before, with all of my plugins in them, can't play because the Renoise, it looks for the AU plugin, but it doesn't find it on the PC. Oh no.
I wonder if you could use an AU to VST wrapper that's out there. Would that help?
It would if I was on a Mac, because you can do it that way around on a Mac, but you can't do it on a PC because I don't think there is an AU wrapper for PC, because PCs are just set with VST. So at the end of the day, anyway, there was the only way that I could actually make it work was because I couldn't open the actual plugin to see the settings in the plugin because it couldn't find the AU to actually open it. So what I had to actually do with all of my files is actually go through and use every plugin's preset system to save out a preset, because the plugin developers make their presets cross-compatible between hosts, so that's fine. So I had to go through all of the files and save out all the presets manually for every one of the plugins, then replace them with their VST equivalents, and then load the settings back in for every one of the files. So
wow,
it was. I'm smiling now.
I noticed it was so stressful. You ate a lot more mandarins.
Yeah, you can see we've got this is slowly depleting. Maybe by next week we'll be down to like just one line here, or maybe it'll be like a whole new stock next week.
Oh, don't restart it. It's like trying to run a marathon and somebody moves the finish line.
Right. So that's me. How are you? How are you, Carl?
I'm doing much better comparatively. That's a nightmare to have to go through that. My goodness. Wish they'd make it.
Don't ever. Or I guess the other thing is if you have to switch platforms in the middle of a project, then just make sure you're using VST and not AU.
And I ran into a similar situation. I had been a regular AU user. I would never use VSTs. I wouldn't even install them. And then something, I can't remember what happened, but to this day I now just use VSTs. I don't even worry about AUs, just in case. Maybe it was Cubase or somebody I opened and it doesn't use AUs. I really kind of talking out of my butt right now because I can't think of what happened. But I'll tell you what, it didn't happen to Vince. There's a great segue. Hey, Vince.
Well, actually, it kind of did. I have a very similar story to this.
You're ruining horrible segue.
It kind of links into what's going on right now. So, in cool news, the Flower soundtrack is going to be out in a little bit. Here's this lovely CD. Yeah, there's a physical CD Flower soundtrack that you'll be able to buy starting tomorrow, actually.
Can we get it on vinyl? Are you going to release on vinyl as well?
No, it's not going to be out on vinyl, unfortunately. But if you want to, take it and then recut it onto an acetate disc, sure, you're welcome to. But kind of funny, with this particular soundtrack, I had the same experience. where I wanted to go back to the old Flower music that I did and try to redo it. And that was hellish, because when I did this, for some reason, I decided to use DirectX versions of the plugins. And that, I mean, this was a cakewalk thing. You know, I'm a Windows guy. I used Cakewalk. Cakewalk was really big on DirectX plugins as opposed to VSTs, which it had sort of minimal support for, actually. There were a lot of VSTs that struggled on Cakewalk. And so, okay, I'm going to go back to these. And by then, I had actually reinstalled everything, and I had all of my old plugins then that I had, but they were all VSTs now. And trying to get the old projects working with the DirectX versions that I was looking for. And then I had to do the exact same thing. Go to the old ones, use the old version of Sonar, save all the presets, load up the new versions of the projects, transfer the presets, etc. So yeah, but hey, you know, there's a Flower soundtrack. You know, get it starting tomorrow.
Do get it.
Check it out.
I bought it a long time ago on my PlayStation 3. It's still on there. It was something you could get at the store. Is it the same track list?
No, there's actually a couple of new tracks on there. Yeah, there's some music that was cut from the game and a couple other cinematic tracks that were not there in the original Sony PS3 version of the soundtrack. So those are there now. So yeah, this is the more definitive limited edition release. So that's cool.
So I had oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, do you have like the DJ Diamante Bro Step remix?
No, I do not. Oh man, that'd be kind of tough. Although now part of my brain is actually parsing that as a challenge. No, I do not have that. I don't think I'll. You know, maybe if I have some time, I'll actually try that. But I don't have too much time these days. So, hey, if you're willing to try that, you know, go for it.
Well, you know, bro step is not really my thing. I hear that the old Carl Johnson there is a bit of an old hand with bro step.
I
got nothing. Bro step. I don't know.
I'll tell you, I got nothing. We used to call each other though at my old job by where we were from, but had bro in the front of it, so I was Brohio.
Oh, I see.
And I had a friend who was from Broconson. He was Broconson. Right. There you go. There's my bro step. That's the best I got. But hey, I wanted to talk about quickly before we got into our topics about the plagiarism show from last week. So I get off that show, and within a day, I won't say anything, obviously, but I'd shared it with Vince. I thought I was sharing it with the whole our whole group, but apparently I'd started a thread between just Vince and I. So I'm sorry if you missed out on this, Alex. But a song was released for games, or I don't know if it's in a game, but it was released by a game composer, and the minute I heard the melody, I was like, oh my god, I've heard that song before, and I tracked it down, and I was like, wow, it's so easy to do. Well, so now fast forward to yesterday, I'm writing a piece, and it's got this weird kind of time signature, which I need to actually mark out and figure out what it is, because it changes every like 3 measures. And the only progression that would come to my head the whole time I was thinking about what I wanted, because I had a melody and I had a rhythm, but I didn't have a progression, so I was trying to figure out what progression to put under it. The only progression that worked within the rhythm and matched the melody was a King Crimson song.
Wow.
I had to throw it out. I worked so hard, and the only thing that would come to my brain was Lark's Tongue and Aspic, Part 2. I was like, oh my god. Because the melody isn't like that, but the rhythm was enough, and of course, obviously, I had that melody somehow was King Crimson-ish because of all the King Crimson I listened to. So I was like, dang it, that stinks when you have to throw out work because you know it's going to sound like somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that plagiarism's a pain in the butt. Thanks for bringing it up, Vince.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Maybe I shouldn't bring up any more topics then.
Well, you've got 2 for today, and I love them. So, Vince, do you want to just go ahead and introduce the topic? The first one? Did you want to do orchestral budgets first, or do you want to do the other one?
Yeah, let's talk about orchestras.
Cool.
Yeah. So, lately, the game that has been populating my Facebook, as well as various iPads and phones all over Candy Crush Soda Saga. Actually, just before the show started, another person invited me to play Candy Crush Soda Saga. Jeez. But it's probably more interesting to us game audio guys, the fact that the music for that game has been recorded by the London Symphony Orchestra and recorded, mixed, and mastered over at Abbey Road. And, so thinking about that, well, first of all, it's not a bad soundtrack. It's a London Symphony Orchestra. They have a really great sound. Not a whole lot of music in the game, though. I thought it was interesting just how much music they would put on there. So Candy Crush Soda Saga, of course, very popular casual match 3 puzzle game. And one of the things that designers and publishers care about when they're making those types of games for the iPhone is getting underneath that size threshold so that it's downloadable by people who are not just on Wi-Fi but are trying to download over a cell phone network. So you can't download a 1 gig app or a 1 gig game. And in fact, the size threshold is 50 megabytes. So Candy Crush Soda Saga is a 46.3 megabyte download.
Oh, wow.
So there's not a whole lot of music that you can put on there unless you want to really sacrifice quality or other game assets. So there's not a whole lot of music in there. And by my count, there's maybe about 5 to 6 minutes of music by the London Symphony Orchestra. That basically means a 3.5 music loop for the main gameplay loop. There is a 20-second looping theme for the title screen. There are a couple of other bits of music and also stingers and sound effects. So there are various sound effects that used to be just little synth explosions and hits, and there are actually things like trills and mordents on the orchestra, the strings, whatnot. So I figure that there's maybe about 6 minutes total of London Symphony Orchestra in Candy Crush Soda Saga. And someone was asking me, go for it, Alex.
I was just going to say, do we know who did the music, or are you getting to that?
Oh, the music was done by... Oh, crap. What is his name? Totally forgot his name. Oh, man. But the music was done by King's in-house music composer.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he also arranged the music. I'm not certain. Johan Holmström is his name, but he's a King employee, King composer, and he's credited with all of King's stuff. But he composed the music. I'm not sure about arrangement and stuff, but obviously it was done by the London Symphony Orchestra. But that begged the question from a lot of people: how much did it really cost to actually make that music happen? Outside of the composition. So I did a little bit of math, and I gathered some of the notes that I actually aggregated over the last year or so. I was looking at various music recording rates, and I basically came to about $35,000 to $45,000. And
wow.
Here's some of the numbers that I used to get that. $35,000 to $45,000.
For how many minutes of music altogether?
Probably 6 minutes.
I would take 35.
I mean, it's certainly not more than 10 because I haven't heard it in the game yet, and maybe there's stuff past level 60 that has a different music track, but also just based on the download size. There's not that much music. Yeah.
I tried to tell a joke and I stepped on your line. Sorry about that.
Was that a spoiler?
I'm just 60? Say right now, Candy Crush is not a bad game. It actually has some really clever puzzle design. And then there's a bunch of puzzles that are tuned in a very frustrating manner, let's just say that. But there's also some really good puzzles there. I think it's actually better than the first one. Worth playing. Worth playing if you're a designer, honestly.
Yeah, I got it. My daughter has been having a blast. I just watch her play it. It's amazing what she can do, Or maybe how they designed the game so that an 8-year-old can play it right away. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, they do a really good job of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I figure that for around 6 minutes, maybe it is 10 minutes, but still, when I was looking around at booking orchestras, 95% of the time, you don't book on an hour basis. You typically book either a full day or a half day of recording. You have a big soundtrack, could take 3 days, 4 full days. You have a very small soundtrack, like say Candy Crush Soda Saga, that's probably a half-day recording session. So they would record Candy Crush in the morning and then maybe record something else in the evening, and then that's the workday for the musicians. So
Wow.
a half-day recording, which would probably be 3 hours of work. How many music? Alex?
Oh, sorry. I'm curious about how that works because I've never, being a synth head, I've never been involved with that side of music production. But the musicians in that context, they're sight reading all day for every session, or do they have time? Do they sit to get the music in advance, or how does that work?
Right. They usually don't get the music in advance.
Wow.
The expectation is that you are sight reading, and you're good enough to sight read it.
Wow.
There are a couple of instances where it will be really, really hard, or maybe the composer writes a specific solo for a specific performer, in which case that individual performer will have the music in advance. But it's also expected that that performer has a special relationship with the composer. Either they've had a long time working relationship, or he's actually being compensated a little bit more in order to prepare for a rather arduous performance.
I see.
Yeah.
We have
So
our buddy in the chat room, the Horn, has raised an interesting point that he says that is it just me or is it like 90% of game use of the LSO and the Abbey Road, is it more of a marketing bullet point rather than a creative advantage that people go for when they contract people like the London Symphony Orchestra? What do you think about that, Vince?
I think that's more right than not. There's for a long time, a lot of music was not actually being funded by the developer, but by the publisher. At least in the old school, if you want to say 10 years ago is old school, of publisher-developer relationships, and publisher would be able to front the cost of music recording, and a lot of the cost would actually come from the marketing budget. So, yeah, guys would actually do that. Often a composer, the choice of a composer, would be a marketing consideration more than a consideration by the developer. The developer and Sony or some other large company would say, well, we have to use him, and we know that if we use him, we can add so much extra marketing oomph to our campaign for this game. Yeah, I mean, it happens. I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. It's just a thing. And a lot of the good musicians these days, they recognize that they do have clout in and of themselves. And indies these days will use that as a factor when making their decision on who to use for their small game, which has a budget of 2-3 months and a couple $1,000 between the few of them that are working on this thing. Am I going to use Danny Baranowski? Danny Baranowski, I'd say, is a good marketing bullet point.
So do the LSO then? When you pay that much for an orchestra, what do you gain over paying a whole lot less for an equally, like for example, a national orchestra of a different country that is of comparable quality, at least from the end user's point of view? Oh, it sounds like an orchestra. What do you gain other than the marketing potential benefit from marketing? What else do you gain from contracting the LSO for that much money?
Well, there is though a skill difference. There is a difference between, say, the LSO and even really good symphony orchestras. The Philly Symphony Orchestra is a world-class symphony orchestra, but they don't sight read all the time like the LSO does. The LSO is, they're kind of like the the Union, LA, and Hollywood guys, where they're expected to sight read all the time and hit film scores all the time, first take. And if it's not the first take, it better damn well be the second take. Yeah, I mean, there are great performers everywhere in the world. That's why we have lots of different options these days for recording orchestra. Eastern Europe, Asia, Australia, the middle of America, not just in the global cities on the coast. Lots of options. But even a world-class performing orchestra that's fantastic at the concert repertory is not necessarily going to be as good as an orchestra that is constantly playing new and different film music, and now in these days, game music.
Yeah, they're exercising that muscle all the time.
Vince, I'm really curious to. So you've worked with contract orchestras before, right, Vince?
Yeah, I've worked a little bit with them. Yeah.
So could you walk us through what the actual experience is like from for a game audio person, like actually how it works, what the process is, what it's actually like being there, what kind of things you can do when you're working together with a live orchestra in the room recording? Because I imagine that, myself included, a lot of viewers and listeners out there actually would never have had the opportunity to do something like that. Me too. I'm really curious about how the whole process works and what the benefits are and what bits are exciting and what bits are challenging. Walk us through recording with an orchestra. Okay.
So, first of all, you have to make a decision on, if you're the composer, whether you're going to be also arranging for the orchestra. And even experienced composers will decide that they'll want someone else to handle the arrangement because it's just a whole other ball of wax. It's tough to deal with. For a lot of current game composers who like you, I mean, even though I tend to have more of an orchestral idiom to my sound, I still work mostly with computers as opposed to flesh and blood performers. So I might do things that aren't necessarily expected out of orchestral performers. Like, oh, I can't have an oboist actually do a trill that fast. That's just hard for a person on any double reed instrument. Okay. On the other hand, a professional arranger will do that. And they'll look at your MIDI, they'll look at your mock-ups and say, oh, okay, let's make this actually properly playable by an orchestra. So that's actually what I did on my most recent project. I said, hey, I'm going to hire you as my arranger. And she did a bang-up job with the arrangement for this orchestra. So we've got now a proper score for an orchestra. Now we actually have to book an orchestra. And there are actually a couple of different services that are out there. Some of them are individuals that have worked with orchestras. Some of them are actually services that are set up by the orchestra themselves, as opposed to just being agents for a couple different orchestras. There are a couple of really popular ones like orchestra.net. If you go to that website, they basically are a big turnkey service where you give them MIDI, you give them mock-ups, and they'll get everything: arrangement, orchestra recording, mixing and mastering, and boom, they'll send it back to you as files.
Wow.
For this one, we sort of picked and chose a little bit. So I've got my arranger, I've got another person who helped to book the orchestra, who had done members of the the Sydney Opera House, and they actually did the music for this game that I can't talk about. So I did some music recording in Australia.
What was that actually like when you're actually going, like when you're actually in the room there with the orchestra? What do they expect of you, and to what extent can you give feedback on what they're doing, and how does that whole process work?
Really quickly. So everything is basically, let's move fast. Let's try to fit as much work as we can into this limited time frame. So we basically booked the studio and the orchestra for a day, and we had so much music that we needed to go through, and we had the scores, and we checked the scores, made sure that everything was there. Oh crap, this is not right. Let's rewrite this. Let's rewrite this individual part, and while we're rewriting this part, let's have them record this other piece. Okay, so we'll switch the schedule around. I'm watching those. I'm listening on the monitors. They're playing this piece. It sounds pretty good. Cool. And I'm looking at this newly written part. Oh, that looks right. I think this will be okay. Let's do this right after this. Oh, okay, we need to do a second take of this. Cool. So it's actually rather frantic in that in the room, because you're trying to fit so much into that day, and you don't want to go. You don't want to go another day because all right, another day is going to be what, another $1,000, $2,000. Then that's just for the studio time, and then for the orchestra members who is actually willing to actually do that, because in this case we were dealing with individuals as opposed to the orchestra as a whole. So we would have to make sure that all the individuals would be able to make scheduling if we needed to do a second day for pickup. So it was a very frantic time to make that work.
Were you conducting?
I was not conducting, actually. I had someone else do the conducting. I'm an okay conductor, but I'm not great. I mean, and quite honestly, I haven't really had to do much of that since college days. So I was like, I instead had another conductor that was recommended to me who had worked with these orchestra members before to do the conducting.
And was it were the results? Did they exceed what you were hoping for, or were they a bit below par what you were hoping for? As far as not, I mean, of course, the quality of the performance, I'm sure, was there. Being the you know, the Sydney, what was it, the Sydney Opera House Symphony Orchestra. But how about in terms of the actual result from a sonic point of view? Were you happy with that, or how did you feel about that at the end of it?
I was pretty happy with it. I was a little annoyed because I didn't quite get to do all the pieces that I wanted. We sort of packed the schedule knowing that we couldn't quite do all the pieces, but we would have been really happy if we would have been able to fit one other piece at the end, and we ended up not being able to do that. But the stuff that we front-loaded that we're like, yes, we have to get recordings of these pieces, those were actually really good. The way that we actually ended up recording this was I wanted a blend of both a small chamber orchestra with synth, and not just synth mock-up for orchestra, but actual synth. Some sampled synth, some classic FM synth, some analog synth, doing these interesting, funky pads and textures along with an orchestra. And blending those things together was actually something I wasn't sure about, because those guys, while they were playing, were not actually playing to tick. They were actually just recording free, and I wanted them to sort of have the freedom to express, along with the conductor, a really free performance with a lot of rubato, a lot of give and take in tempo, and then I would match the synth tempo to their playing. And so it kind of scared me actually doing that. But once everything was combined, it ended up sounding really, really good. So I was actually very happy with it. Even though at the time, even after I heard some really good performances, I was still a little bit scared at the end of the day. Is this all going to really fit together? And it did, finally. After, give them a day, and they finally sent me all the stems of the uncompressed, full resolution tracks. Yeah.
So Matt, in the our good friend Matt M in the chat room is asking a question that probably a lot of people are thinking. Is the end result of using a live orchestra always better than using MIDI or samples? I think we've touched on this before, but what do you think about that?
It really depends. It depends on what the music is about. There are some things that a computer and high-quality samples can do that an orchestra can try to do. if you want a computer sound, if you want something that hits hard with a straight tempo, if you want, I was mentioning before, okay, an oboist, a bassoonist, those double reed instruments, they can't do crazy fast trills. You want them to do this incredibly fast trill that goes from minor second, major second to a major third, and you would need someone that is insane. And orchestra performers, some of them can do insane stuff, but you can't actually count on them to do those things. There are some things that you just cannot count on performers to do, and certainly not on sight reading, even if they are Los Angeles, Hollywood, union guys. And hey, we're game guys, so I can't use those guys yet, but that's a whole other story. But you can do that if you have really high quality samples and you've got a computer. Let's make them do that, and then that will create a sound that is what you want for your piece of music. Now, if you want them to do something that is where everything fits inside of the classical paradigm, the romantic paradigm, the 90s filmic paradigm, as we know of John Williams, Goldsmith, all those guys. Oh, okay, yeah, pretty much the live orchestra is going to be better, sure. But one of the nice things about computers is you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. One other question I had for you is that the technical aspects of recording an orchestra I know nothing about, because that's not really my thing. But I guess in that situation, to maximize the amount of time that you have with the orchestra, everything's all set up there before you turn up. Is that right? And it's just all just going. Every instrument's mic'd individually. Is that how they do it?
Not every instrument, but certainly the first chairs and all sections have your setup of mics over the strings. You're going to have a mic on your first chair violin. You're going to have, if you've got a cello solo, you might have the first chair cello also mic'd up in order to do certain things. La 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 la. So you'll have individual sections and important individuals mic'd, but you'll also have other things like conductor stereo mic'd up if you want that viewpoint, you want that perspective. We also had a Decatree setup, which is actually it's a pretty popular 3 microphone setup for classical recording, which was above stuff, and that's a really good type of recording if you want to do mixed down to stereo or even to mono. It sounds pretty good, but it was just useful to have some extra information there, as well as an idea of what it was that the conductor was hearing from his point of view and why he did things the way that he did.
I see. So you're getting all of those stems when you contract an orchestra, or do that? What kind of processing do they do on the studio?
Typically, when you're booking a recording studio or an orchestra, actually, you might have a package deal either set up for you. Like there are some orchestras where, hey, if you're going to book this orchestra, you're not only booking this orchestra, you're booking this specific studio, and you are booking this specific conductor, and you are booking this specific mix engineer, and he's going to mix and master. This was a little bit more a la carte when I did it. I had these orchestra members. Okay, cool. We had a choice of studio at that point. Do I want to go with this particularly big studio? Do I want to go with the smaller studio? We ended up going with a slightly smaller studio because, well, it wasn't a big-ass 90-piece orchestra. It was actually rather more intimate. So, we didn't need a big sound, so we went with the smaller studio. Did we want one of their in-house engineers to actually mix and master? I decided actually no, because I was going to be messing with it anyways, because I have a penchant for doing interactive music mixing in my games. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be mixing these stems into this layer, and have these different permutations of music for possibilities in game. So it didn't make sense for me to have a mastering engineer actually go in and make that sound good as a 2-track or even a 5.1 mix, because that's not what I would be dealing with in the game.
Yeah, Carl,
but those are all separate line items that you could do.
Carl, do you want to elaborate on, because the Horn has asked a great question here, is for a standard sort of 90-piece orchestra, how many delivered stems is common for these kinds of sessions? Carl's ranges based on the size of the orchestra and the mic choices. Do you want to elaborate on that for our listeners?
Yeah, well, my experience is I've worked with quartets, quintets, and one large orchestra, multiples of the other two, and only once with a large 65-piece orchestra. It depended on too many things to give a number, frankly. It was what the room sounded like was a big deal, because like the quartet sounded good initially when we set up the mics for the quartet and we listened to playback. It wasn't as good as it was once we shifted the mics and added some mics. So we ended up with thinking we would need fewer stems, but ended up needing more, and also they were in the stereo field in different places, so there was some overlap, which we combined into one stem from two different places, if that makes sense, to make the stereo field sound full. So there's so many things that come into play in that case. Is how many instrumentalists do you have? Like Vince said, how many solo instrumentalists are you going to mic? How you want to mic the room is a major part of it, like choosing a Decatree or not. Typically, you always do. And by the way, when Vince was bringing up Decatree, I don't think there's a software out there that doesn't have a Decatree mic option in their mic options for sampled orchestras. It's so common. But and also, not just talking about orchestras. Another kind of recording that I've done a lot of that comes in the same kind of space is choirs. And how are you going to mic choirs? Are you going to mic sections again? Are you going to put them all around one mic by section? Are you just going to use a Decatree? Are you going to put some mics back in the balcony because that's where you get all that rich reverb? So, it's hard to answer that question when he says, I think it was average number or common. What was it? How many delivered?
Yeah, common.
Yeah, it's hard to guess that. It depends upon the size that you need, how many instrumentalists you're going to use, how many mics in the room, how big is the orchestra, how many instrumentalists.
Yeah. I think
of course you base stems off of that information. You're not. It's not like a rock band and you're recording 8 mics on a drum and your stem is those 8 mics compressed down, or bounced down to two tracks. So you don't have to deal with a bunch of. You have a combination of like stereo that's capturing a session, or maybe a mono's capturing a session because you got a solo mic on a cellist that's in that section. But see what I mean? It can get rather confusing. You really don't know what you're in for until you listen to playback and decide what you want there.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important, the choice of studio is actually a very important choice because the room is an instrument, just like all the other instruments that the performers master, except this is the instrument that the engineers have mastered, and they know where to place the mic for this room with this particular configuration. Let's see. Oh, Jack just said, what's a ballpark figure? 3 stem or 300 stem? I would actually say it's right in the middle. When the studio gave me stuff, not right in the middle, like in 150, but actually something like 30 is a pretty typical number if you're dealing with an orchestra session. It could be maybe 50 if you're dealing with an incredibly large orchestra and you have a lot of soloists. It could be 15 maybe. But 3 stems is definitely low, and 300 is definitely high. 20 to 30 I think is about right for an orchestral recording session.
Yeah, I was going to say never leave without stereo stems per section, although that's not fair because I've had mono stems per section. Mono tracks for your solo instruments, and then all room mics. I wouldn't want to leave without that. I would start from there if I were setting up the mics. That's a good way to put it, is how would you initially set up the mics and then grow from there? That's how I would grow. I would grow by section, by instrumentalist, and by room, and then see what we need after that.
Yeah. So let's see.
And then sorry. Then you
go for it, Kyle.
You got me thinking because, there's from an engineer standpoint, there's a time for a ribbon mic and there's a time not to use a ribbon mic, and it's funny because that kind of divides people. I'll meet people who, in my opinion of how you should use or when you should use a ribbon mic, would tell me I'm completely crazy, and then there would be this completely stark opposition that agrees with me. Absolutely, there's no like middle ground with ribbon mics, but it just got me thinking because when I set up mics for a room, it depends on what I'm going to be recording, on whether I'm going to use, and the position on what I'm going to use a ribbon mic for. Like with a choir, that's really easy. I found that one of my favorite ways to record a choir, if this is helpful, is to group the section around a single ribbon mic, and for all of them. I don't like condenser mics in a choir setting, and I certainly, although you could use dynamics because a choir belts it out just like an orchestra does, you actually end up losing some of that high-end quality off of a dynamic mic, I find, anyway, to my ear. And so I find a ribbon mic to be a perfect example for that. But I know guys who would never record a choir with a ribbon mic. I'm having trouble saying choir. What do you feel about ribbon mics?
Because I love them.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a good-sounding choir in a good-sounding room, my gut would be, put basically a Bloomline pair of two good stereo mics in front of them. A Bloomline pair of two ribbon mics in front of them, and just record the choir in that fantastic room. And then there you go.
That's it.
So pretty much. That's all you need.
Stereo. You do a whole choir with two mics?
Yeah, I mean, if they're a good choir, and a good choir sounds good together, and they're constantly listening to each other, and they know the space that they're recording in, and they'll know how to sound good in that space. So you get a good set of mics to record them in that space being awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I still investigate the space to see, like during rehearsals, I'll walk around to find where those sweet spots are, and also find those areas where the reverb will clash, and you don't want to put a mic there. But man, I love that stuff. That's some of the best part of recording, and is when you're finding out what the room sounds like, and definitely, like Vince said, you'll get an orchestra, and this has happened to me more often than not, that they'll say, if you want this orchestra, they record at this place with this engineer and with this conductor, and it makes it easy on you. Yeah. But it's because they know the place, and like maybe it's a little heavy on the mid-range, and some of those mid-range instruments know to kind of watch their volume in those cases, because they can peak that room pretty easily. So it's always good to get the instrumentalists to be in the place they're comfortable performing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vince,
off on a tangent there.
One question I'm also curious to ask, Vince, is for our colleagues in game audio who may have the opportunity to record an orchestra for the first time, when they come to that point of selecting an orchestra, obviously budget plays into it, obviously, but what do you think is the kind of the criteria that they should look for? I mean, how can they expect orchestras to be different when they're surveying the different options that they have as far as which orchestra to actually choose?
Yeah, that is a really hard question. A lot of it comes down to what is the type of music that you're trying to record. And certainly there is some music which is less stressful, which is very easy for people to play, for people to read, for people to perform. The London Symphony Orchestra is a top-notch orchestra that can do pretty much everything right the first take and maybe the second take. And that's basically where I would put all the top LA guys. They are guys that can do anything. If what you want is not super intricate stuff, if what you want is just the sound of an orchestra, maybe what you really want is just the sound of a string orchestra. And a string orchestra is relatively cheap. Or not just relatively cheap, actually just downright cheap. Because if you want to record 60 pieces of strings, you can get a really good recording of 60 pieces of strings for a quarter of the price of 60 pieces of London Symphony Orchestra, because there are lots of different string ensembles out there, and many of them do offer recording services. So I've actually got a note here. A large factor when I got that number of 35,000 or so for London Symphony Orchestra for half a day of work, for the 6 minutes or so of music. The number that I had was about $125 an hour for the musician session pay. Now, going through some of these options I've actually noted here, there's a group, Christian Howe's Strings, and I think if you just go to, I don't have the website here. I think if you just go to like christianhowesstrings.com, he's a string performer, and he actually does a lot of teaching for strings, and he records strings. And the note that I actually have here for the hourly pay for those session musicians, if you want to just record string orchestra, is $35 an hour, which is just a little bit more than a quarter of the London Symphony Orchestra price. So the price can vary wildly. If you want to do let's see, the number that I actually have here, if you want to do members of the Czech Philharmonic, and record in Prague, the number I've got is a base price per musician per hour, $24. So okay, let's add some numbers up, and then that instead of 35,000, you're ending up spending $15,000 for the same amount of music. But that orchestra that's in Czechoslovakia, their strings are going to be really good. They know how to play those strings. Their brass is not going to be as good as the London Symphony Orchestra, who are famous for how good their brass and French horns are. Same with Hollywood and their quality of brass and French horn. So if you want to do intricate brass parts, those guys in Czechoslovakia might not be able to do it quite as well. But if you just want the warmth of strings and that high quality richness that they can add to a score, well, maybe you just want to record strings in Prague.
It's funny.
For a quarter of the price.
You said 35 for 6 minutes, and it'll take them 4 hours, right?
3 hours maybe. I'd say basically a half day of recording is about 3 hours. Then you do a lunch break. Then you do another solid 3 hours, and that's your day.
I got it. Well, I was just thinking about the numbers, and it reminded me of the Chicago song 25 or 6 to 4.
25 or 6 to 4.
You get 35 or 6 to 4. I wonder if that's the secret number that orchestras are using for their... Let's take a Chicago song and add 10 to it.
Does anybody really know what time it is?
So how was the... Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to throw in another rather serious intellectual question. So if you would like to finish with your humor there, Mr. Johnson.
It's done. I have no humor. You've heard it.
Okay. Okay. I played back during high school. I played in an orchestra, and that was kind of the end of my experience with class. Branched out from there into other things. But I'm curious for those people who've never had the opportunity and perhaps have never had education or the experience of playing in an orchestra, or even that much experience in listening to orchestras of varying quality, not just the top world-class recordings that you get, world-class orchestras that you get on recordings. What is the difference then between, like if you have a cheaper orchestra versus the LSO, they're playing the same music and it's relatively, so they're sight reading it, it's not that challenging. What is it that people should be listening for when they're trying to assess the quality of an orchestra performance? I mean, the orchestras are not going to be just turning out recordings with mistakes all through them, right?
No, they probably aren't. But if you listen very carefully, you might be able to hear something that is mostly but not quite covered up. When you're dealing with 20 violins and one violin flubs up on a run, you're not going to notice that. There are going to be mistakes there. If you're going to be in LA, you're not going to tolerate those mistakes, and you're going to have an absolutely perfect, pristine recording. When you get out of LA, there's going to be more fault tolerance that you have to deal with. And it's going to be in mostly in instruments that aren't strings. If you want a French horn that sounds really good up high, you want this just really florid solo. You might not get that in other places. If you want a really good flautist that switches quickly between doing a really great flute solo and then another really great alto flute solo, you might not get that if you're going to be in Eastern Europe. The skill of players is just not there. But if you write really simple music, if let's say you're doing an orchestral track, but the orchestra is just doing driving rhythm, adding texture, you've got drums and synth that are also adding to it, and any mistakes, they're going to be hidden by the fact that it's going to be one person doing that mistake in a section of 16, along with all the other richness that you're adding in post with your synth and drums. So, it's quite possible to do a not just acceptable, but a great recording with Prague, with Warsaw, with a lot of these Eastern European orchestras that honestly get a lot of flack, for basically not being LA or not being London.
Yeah, but there's some really good quality musicians coming out of the. It's a very popular orchestra. I can't think of it right now. Out of Prague or out of Eastern Europe, I can't think of it. They get used in games a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always really happy with what I hear that they're doing. There's really, really some talented people. But Vince brings up another point, which is to, and I know you didn't say they weren't. I just want to make sure that that I said that they were because it just felt important to me. But
right.
Vince also brought up another point is, sessions aren't supposed to be absolutely clean. There's something for music that has a mistake, or the person got behind the beat but somehow caught up, and it adds an emotional kind of feel to the music. If you're going to be writing stuff that is hard to the grid, has to stick exactly to the tempo, then maybe orchestral is not what you want for this project. You want more electric, and it's because of that ebb and flow and that feel that the orchestra gives, and that's what makes it so really appealing. And for my ear anyway, when I hear electronic mixed with orchestral, because I think it's not necessarily the tonal quality of the imposed as orchestra is opposed to electronic, but more the give and take of how one's hard on the rhythm and the other one kind of flows in and out of it, and sometimes they match up and make that hair on your arm stand up, and then sometimes they fall away and give you a whole different feel. I think that's why that's such a powerful combination today, is more how they play with the time, how one plays with the time and the other doesn't, more than the tonal quality of it. But go to your session with your files, because one thing that I did is I asked the guy to constantly throw me 2 tracks so that I could put it into my laptop, and then I could listen to the tone of that 2-track compared with the other instruments that I had in there. I think that's really important. It was actually a big pain in the butt, and the guy didn't want to do it, but when I explained it, like Vince said, you've got 3 to 6 hours to get all of this work done. And you can't just walk away and say, okay, let's hope it worked. You have to get as much information about whether it did work right there in the box. You got to figure out whether it happened. So if you can get the engineer, to be just turning over 2 tracks to you, it doesn't take them but a second to pull them down, given the the CPU process and Pro Tools and the boards and everything, and then throw them into your laptop and take a listen really quickly. I think it's really important. What do you think, Vince?
Oh yeah, definitely. Having the 2 tracks right there, and you can just hear what's going on. And yeah, it's not going to be perfect, but you can hear a whole lot there. And
the sooner you get that figured out, you could look at a mistake and save yourself another $6,000, because you could say, oh, you know what? When I threw the 2-track in my laptop, I didn't hear that mistake, but I hear it when it's raw coming out of those Yamahas. And so if you just go for the raw sound, you're going to go, well, let's do it again,
Yeah, and then you're just shifting the schedule around. Like, okay, let's do that pickup right before lunch, and then boom, bam, hit it.
What about choirs? I imagine, would it be true to say that the difference between quality of a very high quality choir compared to a less well known, less experienced choir of the same size is going to be much more obvious than an orchestra? What's your experience there?
I'm not sure if it's going to be that much of a difference either. It's obviously professional choirs are going to be able to just kick ass at sight reading lots of weird stuff. If you're going to be doing crazy stuff with microtones, you probably don't want the local choir to do that. But I mean, it really depends on the music that you do. Just like, am I going to write something really crazy for a piccolo trumpeter? Am I going to do something crazy for the sopranos to do while the altos are actually in a totally different time signature?
You know what I did for
the
last orchestral thing that I was doing, which was probably 6 months now, probably too long. I took all the music that I had written and put it up on my website for download from any of the instrumentalists who wanted to look at it ahead of time. And I didn't track downloads, but when we did the session, they were ready to go. So I think most of them got the download and on their own time maybe were kind enough to look at the music ahead of time. I think it's important. And with a choir, man, I have never worked with a choir in a sight reading situation. They've always had the music for a week or so before the session. And oddly, as you say, I should have paid for that time. I didn't even think about it. You kind of feel like you're doing them a favor by saying, we're going to do the session and I'm going to make it easier on you at the session by letting you have the music. I guess I should have thought the other way around and said, if you're willing to look at the music earlier, there's a little more money in it for you. Isn't that weird how we don't think sometimes what we should charge for?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. Sometimes you think you're being considerate by asking them, hey, would you mind looking over this? If you think about it as, would you mind looking over this solo so that you're not necessarily sight reading it tomorrow during the session? Yeah. That's actually really big. To have a solo that might be really difficult for an instrumentalist or a soloist, and they spend some time with it. I absolutely think that they should be compensated a little bit more for that.
Yeah, they should, and I didn't even think to offer. I don't think anybody was insulted, but it didn't. I felt like I was just doing a favor by saying, hey, I'm going to get this to you guys early if you want it. It's out here. Go get it.
Well, they probably weren't too insulted. They probably just thought, oh, okay, that's nice. And they'll look through it for about, maybe if it's another 30 minutes, just sort of skimming over that thing. King, they put out that promo video for Candy Crush Soda Saga, and the LSO guys were talking about that sort of musician's machismo of, not actually turning to the piece of music that they're set to play, because we're going to really sight read this thing. I'm not going to look at this until you look at this, right? There's certain machismo there, and that's cool, but, I mean, quite honestly, I would hope that everyone just cares about making really good music, regardless, and not just making a show of it.
So an interesting job. Imagine that, like every day, two completely different. You start in the morning, you're doing a film, then you come to the afternoon, you're doing a game. Go the next day, and you're doing like a TV commercial, and then it must be a interesting life for a professional session orchestral musician. Maybe a little bit of a grind after a while, I imagine, like. It's constant, just churning away at stuff. Interesting.
Yeah, but it's there's something to it about you might be churning away, but it's always different music all the time. One piece might be neoclassical, or something else might be just really crazy modern and atonal, or heuristic, and do your own thing. You might say, hey, all 16 violins improvise on this note. And like, whoa, what's the sound of this? And that could be really fun.
Right.
I was talking about understanding what's the skill of the orchestra that's going to be playing it, but also know that these are musicians too, and they enjoy playing fun music. So, I think for me as a composer, I endeavor to, have them have a little fun with the stuff that they're playing too.
This has been really interesting, guys. It's an area of music and music production recording that few people, have the privilege to actually get involved with. So it's been really interesting to hear your experiences.
Cool.
Great topic, Vince. Great topic. Well, we didn't get to number 2 though.
Well, for another time. Maybe I'll talk about
next week.
Yeah, next week. Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, everybody, thanks for filling up the chat room. Look at how many people are out there.
Well, there's a little off-topic question about GDC. Do we want to broach that a bit?
Yeah.
So Matt's talking about which GDC pass to get, and he's saying, maybe the audio track.
I remember in the day when they didn't even have the audio track.
Oh man.
What was that 1 year they dropped it and then brought it back the next year? That's
that's right. I think wait a minute. Was that? I remembered that. Oh no, that was with Austin, I think.
At the very least, get the Expo Pass and wait outside the doors every night.
Yeah, and there's that whole thing about GDC happens after GDC.
GDC happens after GDC, yes it does.
Yeah, I mean, so much stuff happens in the evening. If it's about networking and relationships, quite honestly, not a whole lot of networking and relationship building happens in the middle of lectures. Lectures are cool. Lectures are neat, but the actual stuff is going to happen immediately after the lecture or at night. Then that's when you have the time to actually strike up a conversation with the actual lecturer about the topic that he or she actually broached there.
We're all going to be there.
Then there's real learning there.
You guys are going to be there too, right? Will Mike be there?
I'll be there. I hope Mike's going to be there.
I haven't been there in the last 2 years.
Well, you were sick last year.
Well, last year I had an excuse, but the year before that it was a project situation. I couldn't go. Hopefully this year there won't be any projects. It's kind of like trying to get a vacation when you first start a job. It's like project come in, and then you go, oh, don't wait, I got to time it so it doesn't come in here because it'll interrupt my flow to GDC, and you want money.
We're going to. We should do if Matt and Chase and anybody else who enjoy our show regularly, if anyone else is going to be there, we should arrange like a lunch or a meetup or something.
Well, we'll do a massive game audio hour and just set at a giant desk.
That'd be good.
With everybody.
Yeah, there'll be no viewers because everybody will be there.
All 10 of us at one day. So I tell you what, though, I joke kind of because it's really serious. Get an Expo Pass and wait outside the doors because GDC happens after GDC. But you got to determine what pass I'm going to get each year because it's expensive. I don't want to do all access and just make it easier on myself because it gives a crap load of money to them, and not that they're not worth the money, but I don't want to give up money easily, and I work very hard for these $2 I get a year. So what's going to happen in the lectures, and you have to say, is it appropriate? Does it not appropriate, but does it relate to what it is that I want to know and what I'm doing? Because you're not going to. It's not like you're paying for an opportunity to sit beside a guy who might give you a gig independently. That happens afterwards. That conversation is something you stoke up with somebody afterwards. So just like Vince said, it's not a social scene when the lectures are going on. It's a quiet business time. You don't really get a chance to talk with people because everybody rushes. If you've never been, one thing I've noticed is that everybody rushes from one place to the other because when you finish a talk, people seem to kind of congregate outside that talk. And then they hurry up and rush off to the next talk that's on their schedule. And so you can't really be at the next talk wanting to meet before the talk. And if you meet after, you've got a very limited time to get somebody's attention that might be surrounded by a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things that you can do at GDC, in my opinion, is to give a talk. If you can come up with a great topic that you want to talk about, that's really, really important because everybody wants to learn from everybody, no matter how short or long your experience is in the game world. But what's even better about that is that you have access to the talk room where you can go in between talks and hang out with other people giving talks. That's a really great social moment right there. Like I literally stole Tim Schafer's chair and didn't even know it and got harassed by Tim Schafer for stealing his chair. That wouldn't have happened at GDC in any other way. So And I didn't even give a talk that year, but a friend did, and I snuck in. But it's important to, if you've got a good topic to talk about, to submit that, because A, GDC wants really good topics, and you may have one, and B, it works to your benefit because you get to hang out with other people who are giving talks. And then afterwards, make sure that you meet up with people, whether you gave a talk or not, to do the social thing, because that's really important.
Yeah, actually, that's what I'm going to be doing next year. I'm actually not going to be buying a pass, I don't think, but I'm going to definitely be there during the week. My partner and I at Winning Blimp, we only have one opportunity every year to actually physically be together, so we're probably going to be just doing work while everybody's in the lectures, and then just make sure that we're hanging around the grounds when people are walking around, and pick up some people for lunch, or, of course, going to different things in the evening. That's what we're going to be doing.
Nice. That's smart. So I'll see you then this year, because I'm going to go, like I say, every year. I always get my hotel. Oh, and by the way, GDC tip, get your hotel now. It's November. December is almost too late to get a hotel for GDC. Start getting your hotel now. Hey, you can get a hotel, give them a credit card, and you can back out in the last 48 hours or something like that. But lock that hotel in ASAP. Yeah,
hotel, important. On various game forums, there are often guys asking, hey, are there any other developers that are going to be in SF for this week? Can I crash a room? And there are a lot of guys that are actually all cool with that, because game development is a tight-knit group, and they're willing to put up with each other.
No, you cannot crash my room.
Okay, maybe not you, but as a whole, game developers are willing to help out each other.
That's true. That's very true. Vince has got a good point, and I always see those on like gang forums. I see that request coming out there. GAF, it's got that common thread. So yeah, absolutely. Don't feel like you have to do it alone.
All right, I better go, guys. So it's been
Me
good.
too. So like us and subscribe to us and tweet us and all of those other us's that you do through social networking, and we will love you long time for that. I really appreciate it. Is that it? I think that's it, guys, right? Didn't I cover everything?
That's it. Also, watch next week.
Watch next week. Yeah.
You forgot watch next week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, watch next week, because we're going to talk about stuff that's really cool. And I'm going to say at the end of every show, so you think that next week we're going to talk about something that's really cool. Never mind. I'm going to go eat.
All right.
Bye, guys. Bye.
See you.
Bye.